the child of Carthage, you close your eyes and drift backward, back through centuries across seas and deserts until you find yourself in the warm glow of an ancient city. This is Carthage, jewel of the western Mediterranean. Whitewashed walls shimmer in the sunlight, harbours bristle with ships heavy with trade, and the air smells of spices, salt and smoke from distant forges. Carthage is alive with voices, Phoenician merchants calling from their stalls, priests chanting hymns to their gods, soldiers drilling in the heat of the day. And somewhere among these busy streets, a boy is growing into a destiny that will shake the world. His name is Hannibal Barca. Hannibal is born around 247 BC, in the very year Carthage suffers bitter defeat at the hands of Rome in the First Punic War. His family name, Barca, means thunderbolt, a sign of the fierce energy and military spirit coursing through his bloodline. His father, Hannibal Barca, is a seasoned general, hardened by years of war against the Romans in Sicily. Carthage has lost territory, wealth, and pride, and Hamilcar is determined that Rome will one day pay for its victory. The boy Hannibal grows up in a household where war is never far from thought. At meals, soldiers share tales of sieges and campaigns. Maps are unrolled across tables, lines drawn in charcoal showing coastlines, mountain passes, and rivers, the features of lands yet to be conquered. His father's armor hangs in the family villa, like a silent guardian, its bronze gleaming whenever the sun filters through. One evening, Hamilcar prepares to march to Iberia to conquer new lands and restore Carthaginian power. He turns to his son, still barely a boy, and leads him by the hand to the temple of Baal-Hamon, the great god of Carthage. The flames flicker the air, thick with incense shadows dance on carved stone walls. There before the god, Hamilcar makes his son swear an oath that as long as Hannibal breathes, he will be an enemy of Rome. The story is told and retold for centuries how the young Hannibal, eyes wide in the firelight, swore eternal hatred, binding his life's path with the destiny of his people. As you listen, you can almost feel the weight of that moment. A child's promise whispered in the hush of a temple would echo across the centuries. Life in Carthage nurtures this boy with both wealth and danger. Carthage is a place of contrasts, rich from trade, yet restless from war. Its empire stretches across North Africa, Spain, and islands scattered in the sea, yet Rome looms like a rival shadow, growing stronger with each passing year. In the marketplaces, Hannibal hears traders from Greece and Egypt. He listens to sailors describe the storms of the Atlantic or the strange beasts of Africa. Every story fills his mind with visions of lands and battles waiting for him. Religion, too, shapes his childhood. The Carthaginians worship Baal-Hamon and Tanit gods of fertility, fire, and protection. Rituals are solemn, sometimes harsh, and always powerful. Priests in flowing robes chant in ancient tongues, offering sacrifices to win the gods' favor. For young Hannibal, these moments bind the spiritual world to the life of war, a belief that his cause is not only just, but sacred. To fight Rome is to fulfill a divine duty to defend the very soul of Carthage. And beyond the walls of temples, Hannibal grows into a boy of keen eyes and restless energy. Anecdotes from his youth speak of a child who was curious, fearless, and hungry for the art of war. He watches the cavalry train their horses, mesmerized by the thunder of hooves. He learns the shapes of weapons, the weight of a spear, the the tension of a bowstring. By the time he is old enough to carry arms, it seems as though he has always been preparing for it. The world around him is also shaping. Rome has not rested since the First Punic War. It has built fleets, trained armies, and is pressing ever outward into Gaul, into Italy, across the Mediterranean. Carthage, battered but unbroken, looks to Iberia, today's Spain, as its hope of recovery. Hamilcar leads this expansion, carving out territory with sword and fire. Hannibal watches, learns, and waits for the day he will join his father in the field. But beneath the boy's determination there lingers a softer human truth. Imagine him walking at dusk through the olive groves outside Carthage, hearing the seas whisper against the rocks. The city's lights flicker behind him, and the stars wheel above. Did he wonder what kind of man he would become? Did he feel the weight of the vow pressed upon him even before he could fully grasp its meaning? A boy sworn to eternal war, how heavy such a promise must have been, and yet how firmly he carried it. The people of Carthage see something in Hannibal even as a child. Stories say he was sharp of wit, bold in word, and quick to act. Soldiers joke that he carries his father's fire, but with a sharper edge. Priests bless him, hoping the gods will guide his hand. Merchants smile when they see him, for in his eyes is a spark that promises Carthage might one day rise again. As you lie here, drifting deeper into this tale, you can almost hear the sea against the harbour walls of Carthage. You can smell the resin of cedarwood ships, the salt of the wind, the sweetness of figs from Iberia. And in the midst of this bustling empire, you see a boy Hannibal, his gaze already fixed on a distant horizon where the shadow of Rome stretches long. Already the seeds of his legend are planted. Soon he will take up arms, and the world will tremble at his name. A young commander rises. The boy grows into a young man, and the oath, sworn in the temple, begins to take shape in the rhythm of his life. Hannibal Barca does not inherit an ordinary childhood. While other boys of Carthage learn the art of trade, the sway of politics, or the craft of merchants, Hannibal's classroom is the camp. His tutors are soldiers hardened by years of campaigning. His textbooks, the scars of battles fought across Sicily and Spain. His father, Hamilcar, becomes his stern but guiding star. By the time Hannibal is 9, Hamilcar has already led thousands of men across the sea to Iberia, carving out an empire of silver mines and fertile lands for Carthage. It is said that young Hannibal pleaded with his father to be taken along, not to be left behind in the safety of Carthage. Hamilcar relents, and so the boy follows not as a child sheltered, but as a witness to the weight of war. The soldiers speak of the boy who keeps pace on long marches, who does not complain of dust or hunger. They whisper that he seems born for the hardships of the army. He listens intently when officers discuss formations and maneuvers, sketching the lines in the dirt with a stick. And at night, when the fires burn low and the stars watch silently, Hannibal stares into the embers as though already planning battles of his own. In Iberia, Hannibal sees the vastness of the world-wide rivers, glinting in sunlight, forests echoing with the cries of wild beasts, mountains rising against the horizon. He learns the language of local tribes, eats their food, and even joins in their hunts. These tribes will one day form part of his army, and it is said they followed him more loyally than many Carthaginian nobles. For Hannibal wins men's hearts not only by command, but by sharing their burdens. He sleeps where they sleep, eats what they eat, and risks what they risk. Time passes, and Hannibal grows into his late teens. His father falls in battle, and command passes to his brother-in-law, Hasdrubal the Fair. Hannibal continues to serve no longer as a boy, but as a young officer. He learns diplomacy watching Hasdrubal weave alliances with Iberian tribes. But where Hasdrubal is smooth and charming, Hannibal is fierce and uncompromising. His loyalty lies with the sword. An anecdote survives of these years, a skirmish in which Hannibal, still little more than 20, rides with the cavalry into battle. The enemy, thinking him untested, underestimates his resolve, but Hannibal charges at the front, his spear shattering, shields his horse, plunging through the fray. He fights not only with strength, but with calculation, steering his men to cut off the enemy's retreat. The victory is small in scale, yet it echoes in the camp, for it shows the steel in the young commander. By 221 BC, Hasdrubal is assassinated, and the Iberian troops, fierce warriors hardened in campaigns, turn to Hannibal. They raise their voices as one demanding he become their leader. The Carthaginian council hesitates, but the will of the army cannot be ignored. At just 26 years of age, Hannibal Barca becomes commander of Carthage's forces in Iberia. The torch passed from Hamilcar now burns in his hands. From the very beginning, Hannibal proves himself both ruthless and brilliant. He campaigns swiftly, subduing tribes that resist, forging alliances with those who yield. He moves with speed, striking before his enemies can gather, using both terror and mercy to bend Iberia to Carthage's will. His soldiers, both Carthaginian and Iberian, follow him with devotion. They know he will lead them into hardship, but also to glory. The Roman Republic, ever watchful, grows uneasy at the rising shadow of Hamilcar's son. A treaty exists marking the Ebro River in Iberia as the boundary Carthage must not cross. Yet Hannibal's gaze is drawn to Saguntum, a city south of that river, but allied to Rome. It becomes the spark that will ignite the Second Punic War. But before that great storm, there are glimpses of the man Hannibal has become. He is described as neither tall nor short, his face weathered beyond his years, his eyes burning with restless energy. He wears simple clothes, marches alongside his men, and earns their love by sharing their toil. His enemies call him cunning, even cruel, but his soldiers know him as a leader who never abandons them. At the heart of his character lies the oath of his childhood. Every decision, every campaign, every risk carries the echo of that promise to be the enemy of Rome. His officers speak of how, even in moments of rest, Hannibal talks of the Republic across the sea, its legions, its wealth, its hunger for conquest. To him, Rome is not just an adversary. It is the destiny against which his life will measure itself. In the quiet of his tent, lit by a flickering oil lamp, Hannibal studies maps of Italy. He traces with his finger the rivers, the mountain, passes the plains where Rome's armies gather. He knows that one day he will have to cross into that land to bring the fight not on foreign soil but into the heart of his enemy. It is an idea as daring as it is impossible, yet in Hannibal's mind it is already inevitable. The soldiers begin to tell stories. They say their commander sleeps less than any of them, that he rises before dawn and rides the camp, speaking with scouts, checking weapons, greeting men by name. They say he eats sparingly sometimes, only bread and water, and that when sickness comes, he bears it without complaint. To his army, Hannibal is not just a commander. He is a force of nature, a living embodiment of the thunderbolt his family name carries. And so as night falls over the Iberian hills, the young commander looks toward Rome. His path is set, his destiny clear. The drums of war echo faintly in the distance, and soon the Mediterranean will again be aflame with the clash of empires. Hannibal Barca is ready, and the world is about to know his name. Fire between empires. You breathe slowly, and the world around you shifts. The flickering firelight of Hannibal's camp fades, replaced by the wide expanse of the Mediterranean Sea. Its waters shimmer under the sun, dotted with sails. Phoenician traders, Roman galleys, Greek merchants, all crossing the great inland sea that binds empires together. The Mediterranean is more than water. It is the lifeline of nations, the stage upon which Carthage and Rome will clash once again. On one shore lies Rome, rising like an iron colossus from the Italian peninsula. The Republic has grown rapidly since its founding centuries earlier, driven by discipline, ambition, and the unyielding will of its people. Rome is not yet the empire it will become, but already it is powerful. Its legions, citizen soldiers bound by oath and law, are unmatched in their organization. Its Senate debates endlessly, but always with a singular purpose: expansion. Every war Rome fights, it emerges stronger, claiming land allies and tribute. On the opposite shore lies Carthage, proud heir of Phoenician sailors, master of trade, and keeper of the western Mediterranean. From its harbour rise walls so high that visiting Greeks marvelled at them. Carthage commands fleets, markets overflowing with silver from Iberian mines, ivory from Africa, and fine textiles from across the sea. Its power flows not from citizen legions, but from wealth, which pays mercenaries from every corner: Iberian swordsmen, Libyan spearmen, Numidian cavalry. Unlike Rome, whose strength grows from its citizens, Carthage's armies are drawn from many nations, woven together under Carthaginian command. The First Punic War, fought a generation before Hannibal, ended in disaster for Carthage. Sicily was lost, Corsica and Sardinia surrendered, and Rome's navy rose supreme. Carthage was forced to pay heavy tribute, and resentment ran deep. For Hannibal's family, the Barcids, this humiliation was unbearable. Hamilcar had carried his sons across the sea to Iberia, determined to rebuild Carthaginian strength. There, in rich new lands, the seeds of revenge took root. By 219 BC, Hannibal is commander of the army in Iberia. His gaze falls upon Saguntum, a city allied to Rome, but lying south of the Ebro River, outside Rome's official sphere. Saguntum becomes the tinderbox. Hannibal lays siege, and after 8 months the city falls. Rome demands his surrender. Carthage refuses. The embers flare into flame. The Second Punic War begins. Picture it now, the map of the Mediterranean stretched before you like a great tapestry. In the west, Carthage rules Iberia and North Africa, stretching its hand across the seas. In the center, Rome dominates Italy with allies in every direction. Between them lie islands, mountains, and restless peoples waiting to be drawn into the struggle. From 218 to 201 BC, for nearly 2 decades, these two titans will wrestle for supremacy. The conflict is not merely about territory, it is about survival. For Rome, Carthage is a threat that must be destroyed. For Carthage, Rome is the rival that has stolen its pride. The war is fought across 3 continents, in Spain, in Italy, in Africa, and even in Greece, as each side seeks to outmaneuver the other. Yet at its heart, the story of the Second Punic War is the story of one man, Hannibal Barca. Unlike other commanders who defend their homelands, Hannibal carries the war directly into the land of his enemy. His strategy is bold, almost unthinkable. Rather than waiting for Rome to strike Carthage's holdings in Spain or Africa, he will march his army over mountains no army has dared to cross into Italy itself. There he hopes to shatter Rome's alliances, rally its enemies, and bring the Republic to its knees. The Romans, for their part, expect to fight in Spain or in the seas of the western Mediterranean. They do not imagine that an enemy might descend upon them from the snowy ridges of the Alps. But Hannibal is already preparing. His army is not the largest Rome has ever faced, but it is forged in fire Iberian infantry, Libyan spearmen, Balearic slingers with deadly aim, and the swift Numidian horsemen riders so fast they seem to fly across the battlefield. And towering among them are war elephants, massive and terrifying, their tusks capped in bronze, their presence enough to unnerve even the bravest legionary. Rome and Carthage both summon their strength. The Roman Senate dispatches consuls with legions to guard Italy and sail for Spain. Carthage sends ships to hold its harbours and hopes Hannibal's daring plan will tip the balance. The Mediterranean is restless. Every city, every island, every ally feels the coming storm. As the war opens, the world holds its breath. This is not a small conflict of borders or towns. This is a struggle to decide who will rule the Mediterranean, who will shape the destiny of nations. The Second Punic War will become one of the most famous conflicts in history. It will give rise to tales of bravery and cruelty, of cunning and tragedy. Its battles, Trebia, Trasimene, Cannae, Zama, will be studied for centuries, and at the center of it all, a single general will stride across mountains, rivers and fields of blood, Hannibal Barca, the thunderbolt of Carthage. As you rest, let the vision of the Mediterranean settle in your mind, a sea shimmering between two empires, each watching the other, each preparing to strike. The fire between them has been lit, and soon the world will blaze. The march over the mountains. The year is 218 BC. The Mediterranean world buzzes with rumors of war, yet none can imagine the path Hannibal Barca has chosen. He has crushed Saguntum, defied Rome, and now prepares for a campaign unlike any before. His eyes are not fixed on Spain nor on Africa, but on Italy itself, the very heartland of his enemy. To reach it, he will march his army across the Pyrenees, then the Rhone, and then into the towering Alps. Close your eyes and picture it, an army stretching for miles, banners fluttering in the wind, soldiers from many lands marching side by side. Iberian warriors, their shields painted with bright designs, Libyan spearmen in iron helmets, Balearic slingers carrying pouches of stones, and the swift Numidian cavalry riders who can turn their horses on a coin. And above them all, towering, lumbering, almost otherworldly, the war elephants of Carthage, their tusks capped in bronze, their massive forms stirring both awe and fear. From Iberia, Hannibal leads perhaps 90,000 men, but the journey will cut deep. The Pyrenees test them with rugged hills, and local tribes rise against them, forcing Hannibal to fight before even leaving Spain. Yet he presses on, reducing his numbers, but strengthening his resolve. Across the Rhone he builds rafts to ferry elephant soldiers and supplies. Roman scouts shadow him, but Hannibal moves with speed, deceiving them, slipping away like a shadow in the dawn. And then, looming in the distance, the Alps rise, jagged, snow-capped and forbidding. To the Romans these mountains are a wall no army can cross, but Hannibal sees only a road, harsh, yes, but a road nonetheless. The climb begins. The air grows cold, biting against skin unaccustomed to snow. Soldiers from Africa and Iberia, who once marched under hot suns, now trudge through frost and sleet. Paths narrow to ledges no wider than a man's shoulders, with dizzying drops plunging into misty abysses. Avalanches thunder from above. Stones give way beneath hooves and boots. Men slip. Horses tumble. Elephants falter. Supplies dwindle. Imagine the sound of that march, the crack of ice underfoot, the groans of beasts of burden, the cries of men clinging to cliffs. Yet, in the midst of hardship, Hannibal rides among them, his voice steady, his presence unshaken. He encourages, he orders, he fights despair with iron will. He knows that to turn back is to surrender, and surrender is a word the Barcid line does not know. The elephants too become symbols of determination. Their massive bodies push forward despite the cold, their trunks reaching out to steady themselves on rocks, their breath steaming in the mountain air. Among them is one Hannibal cherishes most, Surus, the great one-tusked elephant. Legend says Hannibal, later blind in one eye from sickness, often rode upon Surus, the loyal beast, who carried him through snow and battle alike. Some whisper that Surus came from far Syria, his name meaning the Syrian, though others say he was African-born. His true origin remains a mystery, but his legend endures the symbol of courage in an impossible journey. Day after day the army climbs battles tribes who hurl stones from above, clears blocked passes, rebuilds collapsed paths with their own hands. Hunger gnaws at them, frost bites their fingers, yet Hannibal presses them onward. He reminds them of the prize awaiting on the far side, the fertile plains of Italy, the chance to strike Rome where it is most vulnerable. At last, after nearly 2 weeks in the high mountains, the army descends. But what emerges from the Alps is no longer the great host that began the march. Of the 90,000 who left Spain, perhaps only 20,000 infantry, 6,000 cavalry, and a handful of elephants remain. Many have perished to the cold, to avalanches, to hunger and exhaustion. Yet those who survive are hardened, welded together by shared suffering, and bound by unshakable loyalty to their commander. And there, as they step onto Italian soil, the impossible has been achieved. The Romans, who thought themselves safe behind the Alps, stare in disbelief as Hannibal's army appears on their doorstep, battered but unbroken, fierce as ever. This crossing is not merely a march, it is a masterpiece of willpower. No general before or after has dared so audacious a move with such diverse forces. It shocks the ancient world and remains one of the greatest feats in military history. From the snowy heights of the Alps, Hannibal now descends into the plains of northern Italy, where rich fields stretch wide, where Roman allies live uneasily, and where the legions gather. Ahead lie battles that will echo through time, Trebia, Trasimene, and the greatest of them all, Cannae. For now, as you rest, picture the last embers of campfires flickering against the icy rocks, the silhouettes of elephants moving slowly through mist, and the steady gaze of a general who has led his army through the impossible. Hannibal Barca stands in Italy. The war against Rome has truly begun. The Song of Triumph. Cannae. The year is 216 BC. The sun rises hot and unyielding over the plains of southern Italy near a small town called Cannae. The land is open and flat, swept by winds from the Adriatic Sea fields of grain swaying under the summer sky. On this soil, Hannibal Barca will inscribe his greatest masterpiece, one of the most devastating victories ever achieved by any general in all of history. Rome has suffered blows already. At Trebia, Hannibal ambushed a Roman army in icy rivers. At Lake Trasimene, he lured another into a trap among hills and fog where thousands were slaughtered, and the consul Flaminius was killed. Rome is shaken but not broken. Now, under the leadership of consuls Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro, the Republic gathers its might. The Romans raise an army the likes of which the Republic has never seen. Nearly 80,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry citizens, allies' legions drawn from every corner of Italy. Their confidence lies in numbers to crush Hannibal by sheer weight, to overwhelm him with men and steel. Hannibal, by contrast, commands perhaps 40,000 infantry and 10,000 cavalry. Fewer men, yet veterans hardened by years of war, loyal to their commander, who has led them across rivers, mountains, and snow. His army is a mosaic of peoples, Iberians with curved swords, Gauls, fierce and wild Libyans, disciplined with long spears, and the swift Numidian horsemen, unmatched in speed and maneuver. The stage is set. At dawn, Hannibal arranges his forces. His infantry forms a crescent, bulging outward toward the Romans. In the center, he places his Gauls and Iberians, brave but less disciplined, while his strongest troops, the Libyans, wait on either side, slightly back like hidden blades. His cavalry, both Iberian heavy horse and Numidian light riders, guard the flanks. Across the plain, the Romans form in their traditional block a massive column of infantry, packed tightly, row upon row of shields and spears, meant to drive forward with unstoppable force. Their cavalry is divided on the wings, but they are outnumbered there, weaker than Hannibal's riders. The wind stirs dust, the air hums with tension. Then, with a roar of horns, the battle begins. The Roman infantry surges forward, pressing against Hannibal's centre. At first it seems they will succeed. The Gauls and Iberians fall back, the crescent bending inward. To the Romans it looks like weakness, retreat, even collapse. They press harder, shoving their mass of men into the narrowing pocket. But this is no accident. It is Hannibal's design. He draws the Romans in deeper and deeper, their formation crowding tighter, their movements restricted. And then at the signal the trap springs. On either side the Libyan infantry advances. Like jaws closing, they strike the Roman flanks, spears stabbing into the packed mass. At the same moment, Hannibal's cavalry, victorious on the wings, wheels behind the Roman army. Dust rises as Numidian horsemen race, like shadows cutting off the escape. The Romans are trapped, 80,000 men pressed together in a tightening circle, surrounded on all sides. What began as an attack turns into a nightmare. There is no room to fight, no space to maneuver. Soldiers cannot lift their swords. They are crushed by the press of their own comrades. Panic spreads, shouts become screams, blood soaks the dust of Cannae. For hours the slaughter continues. The Carthaginians cut down Romans without mercy, methodically, relentlessly. When night finally falls, as many as 50,000 Romans lie dead on the field. Tens of thousands more are captured. Among the dead are senators, consuls, and Rome's noblest sons. It is the darkest day in Rome's history, and at the center of it all, calm and resolute, is Hannibal Barca. His strategy, the double envelopment encircling the enemy, entirely becomes the stuff of legend. Generals centuries later will study it, from Scipio to Napoleon to modern commanders. To this day, Cannae is taught as the pinnacle of battlefield genius. Yet for Hannibal, victory brings both triumph and sorrow. His army has performed beyond all measure, but the war is not over. Rome, though broken and bleeding, does not surrender. The Senate refuses peace. They will fight on, raising new armies, calling on allies, refusing to yield, even after catastrophe. Hannibal's dream to shatter Rome with one stroke is denied. Still, for the moment, Cannae belongs to him. The survivors whisper his name in fear. Across Italy, allies waver, some defecting to his side. Carthage rejoices while Rome trembles. And history itself pauses to acknowledge the brilliance of the man who has achieved the impossible. As you drift deeper into this story, imagine the silence that follows the storm, the fields of Cannae, strewn with shields and broken standards, the river running red, the cries fading into night. In that silence, you feel the immensity of Hannibal's triumph, the weight of history turning beneath his feet. Hannibal Barca, the thunderbolt of Carthage, has carved his masterpiece upon the world. The Song of Sorrow. Zama. The years pass. Hannibal roams across Italy, his victories dazzling yet incomplete, though he wins again and again at Trebia, Trasimene. Cannae, Rome, refuses to bow. Unlike other enemies who collapse after defeat, the Republic endures. Its Senate, hardened by crisis, raises new legions, calls upon allies, and wears down the Carthaginian invader through sheer resilience. Hannibal, though brilliant, is left stranded. Carthage, cautious and divided, fails to send him the reinforcements he needs. Time erodes his advantage. While Hannibal prowls Italy, a Roman general rises, Publius Cornelius Scipio. He has studied Hannibal's methods, admired his cunning, and learned from his disasters. Scipio takes the war to Iberia, capturing Carthage's strongholds, and then sails to Africa itself, striking at the Carthaginian heart. At last Hannibal is recalled from Italy. He has spent more than 15 years fighting in enemy territory, but now the war has returned home. In 202 BC, two armies converge on the plains near a town called Zama, deep in North Africa. The morning is clear, the land flat and wide, perfect for cavalry maneuvers. Hannibal commands perhaps 40,000 infantry, 4,000 cavalry, and 80 war elephants, mighty beasts he hopes will smash through Roman lines. Scipio brings fewer men, but his army is hardened, disciplined, and supported by Numidian allies who once rode with Carthage, but have now turned to Rome. It is a bitter twist. The same horsemen who once danced around Roman legions now serve their enemy. Hannibal arranges his elephants at the front, hoping to terrify the Romans. Behind them, layers of infantry mercenaries in the first line, Carthaginian citizens and veterans in the second, and his most experienced soldiers, the men who marched with him through Italy, in the rear. His cavalry stands on the wings, ready to clash with Scipio's horsemen. The battle begins with a thunder of hooves and the trumpeting cries of elephants. The great beasts charge forward, tusks, gleaming ears, flapping like sails. But Scipio is prepared. His soldiers part their ranks into channels, letting the elephants pass through harmlessly. Trumpets blare, confusing the animals, some of which turn back and trample their own lines. The mighty shock that Hannibal hoped for fails. The infantry advance. Mercenaries and Romans clash swords, striking shields the air, filled with cries and dust. Hannibal's front line fights hard but falters under Roman pressure, retreating into the second line and sowing disorder. Scipio's men push steadily step by step, unyielding. Then the cavalry meets. On one side, Hannibal's riders brave but outnumbered. On the other, Scipio's Roman and Numidian allies swift and skilled. The clash is fierce dust rising in great clouds, but soon the Carthaginian cavalry is driven off. The Roman horsemen pursue them, leaving the field. Now the battle hinges on the infantry. Hannibal commits his veterans, those hardened by decades of war, the men who fought at Cannae, who crossed the Alps, who have followed him through snow and fire. They meet the Roman legions in brutal combat, shield against shield, sword against sword. For a time, it is evenly matched, the greatest warriors of Carthage against the disciplined machine of Rome. But then, like a shadow returning, the Roman cavalry reappears. Having driven off Hannibal's riders, they sweep around behind the Carthaginian lines. Dust and thunder announce their arrival. Suddenly Hannibal's army, still locked with Roman infantry in front, is struck from the rear. The circle closes just as it had at Cannae, but this time against Hannibal. His army is trapped. The slaughter begins. Men who once carved victories across Italy now fall on their own soil, cut down in waves. Hannibal fights to the last his veterans, resisting with grim determination, but the field is lost. When the dust settles, tens of thousands of Carthaginians lie dead. Hannibal escapes with a handful, his heart heavy with the knowledge that his greatest battle is also his final defeat. The thunderbolt has struck for the last time. Zama is more than a battle. It is the end of Carthage's power. The terms Rome imposes are harsh. Carthage must surrender its fleet, pay crushing tribute, and never again wage war without Rome's consent. The dream of empire is gone. Carthage survives as a city, but no longer as a rival. And Hannibal, the man who once terrified Rome, now becomes a fugitive in his own land. He has fought with brilliance, courage, and daring, but against Rome's iron will, even genius cannot prevail forever. As you rest, picture the fields of Zama under the African sun, the silence after the clash, the broken standards and fallen spears. Imagine Hannibal standing on a hill, watching the dust settle, knowing the war is lost. His song of triumph has ended in sorrow, but his name will never fade. For though Rome has won, the legend of Hannibal Barca, the boy who swore hatred, the general who crossed the Alps, the master of Cannae, will live for as long as history is told. The elephants and the mountains, the Alps, still loom in memory, jagged ridges against the sky, snow swirling around peaks, narrow paths carved by desperate men and beasts. Hannibal's crossing is not only a feat of war, but also a story wrapped in mystery, one that has captured the imagination of historians, poets, and adventurers for over 2,000 years. Even now, scholars argue about the details, tracing his footsteps across those mountains, seeking answers to questions left in the mists of time. The most enduring mystery is the elephants. Imagine them again, towering animals, tusks, gleaming, lumbering through snow and ice. How did Hannibal, marching with such a vast army supply, and guide these giants across the perilous passes? And where did they come from? Some believe they were African elephants captured in the wilds south of Carthage, trained for war. Others suggest they were a smaller, now extinct species once found in North Africa, more agile, perhaps more suited to the difficult terrain. A few even whisper that some of Hannibal's elephants may have been Asian gifts or purchases from far-off lands through Carthage's wide trading network. The truth remains uncertain, a puzzle stretching across continents. Among these beasts, one stands out in legend: Surus, the one-tusked elephant. Stories tell that Hannibal loved this animal above the others, riding him in battle, trusting him through the hardest marches. The name Surus means the Syrian, a clue that perhaps he came from distant Syria, traded through markets where east met west. To some, this suggests Hannibal's reach was wider than we imagine, his army carrying echoes of faraway lands. To others, it is simply a tale embroidered by time. But the legend deepens. During the long campaigns in Italy, Hannibal fell ill and lost sight in one eye. From that day, he rode more often upon Surus, towering above his men, the general and his elephant both marked by scars of hardship. Together they became symbols of endurance, pressing forward when others would falter. In the cold mists of the Alps or on the hot plains of Italy, the sight of Hannibal upon Surus must have filled his soldiers with awe. And then there is the question of the route itself. How did Hannibal's army, tens of thousands of men, horses and elephants, cross those daunting peaks? For centuries, scholars have debated, each proposing their own path. Some point to the Col du Clapier, a pass about 2,400 meters high, less steep, perhaps easier for men and beasts. Others argue for the Col de la Traversette, higher and more treacherous, where the land narrows to a knife edge, the descent almost impossible. Evidence is scarce, yet hints remain. Ancient writers describe landslides, sheer cliffs, snowdrifts. Some modern scientists searching the soils of alpine passes have found traces, odd layers of sediment, perhaps the remains of animal waste, suggesting the passage of horses and elephants 2 millennia ago. Was this the path Hannibal took? No one can say for certain. Close your eyes and imagine the scene. A line of men, their cloaks wrapped tight against icy winds, struggling upward on slippery slopes. Horses whinny their hooves, slipping on loose stones. The elephants strain each step, heavy trunks reaching forward for balance. Above them, snow swirls the air, thin and sharp in the lungs. Below, the land falls away into mist and shadow. And at the front, Hannibal rides, his voice steady, urging them on. This march is more than strategy. It is myth, almost beyond belief. The Romans waiting in Italy never expected it. They thought the Alps were an unbreakable barrier, a wall no enemy would dare to climb. Yet Hannibal shattered that illusion. He did what none thought possible, and in doing so he not only outflanked his enemies but also carved his name into legend. The mysteries remain. Where exactly did he cross? How many elephants survived the passage? What happened to Surus? Did he fight in battles beyond the mountains? Or did the long ordeal claim him in the snow? We do not know. These unanswered questions are part of Hannibal's magic, the reason his story continues to captivate us after centuries. And so as you listen, let your thoughts drift into those mists. See the shapes of elephants half hidden in swirling snow. Hear the creak of leather harnesses, the crunch of boots on ice, the groans of soldiers pushing carts over broken ground. Smell the smoke of campfires thin against the freezing air. The Alps rise around you, eternal, indifferent, yet bearing silent witness to one of history's greatest feats. In the end, the details may be lost to time, but the truth that matters endures. Hannibal Barca led his army, men and beasts alike, across the roof of the world into the land of his enemies, and struck at the heart of Rome. And that is why even now, when we speak of courage, daring, and impossible resolve, we remember Hannibal and his elephants and the mountains that could not stop them. Echoes of Cannae. The fields of Cannae still lie silent under the Italian sun. The dust has long settled, the cries of men long faded, but the echo of that day in 216 BC continues to resound through history. For Hannibal's victory at Cannae was not merely a triumph of arms, it was a lesson in the art of war, studied and admired by generations who came after. Imagine the scene once more. 80,000 Roman infantry pressing forward, their massive column squeezing itself into Hannibal's crescent. The enemy, thinking they had broken him, surged deeper. And then the jaws closed. Libyan infantry from the flanks, Numidian cavalry from behind, and the Roman army, so vast and mighty, was crushed into a cage of its own making. Ancient writers lingered over this moment. Livy described it with awe, noting the staggering death toll, nearly 50,000 Romans killed in a single day. Polybius, the Greek historian, admired the strategy itself, the elegance of the double envelopment, the way Hannibal anticipated not only the battlefield, but the psychology of his enemy. To Hannibal, the Romans' greatest strength, their stubborn, headlong charge, became the key to their undoing. Even centuries later, generals would study this battle. Frederick the Great of Prussia, Napoleon Bonaparte of France, and countless others pored over the accounts of Cannae. In modern military academies, the word Cannae still conjures visions of perfect encirclement, the ultimate tactical victory. It is taught not simply as history, but as blueprint how to destroy an enemy larger than oneself by patience, cunning, and geometry of movement. But beyond the brilliance there are human stories. Roman survivors spoke of the terror of being trapped, of suffocating in the press of their own comrades, unable even to lift their swords. Men fell not only to blades, but to the crush of bodies, to the panic that rippled like fire through the ranks. Some accounts describe soldiers clawing at the ground, desperate to breathe, crushed under the weight of legion upon legion. Carthaginian veterans, too, told their tales, how they watched their commander with admiration, how his calm presence reassured them even as the enemy closed in. They spoke of his precision, how every movement of the battle seemed guided by his hand, how he rode the lines, encouraging his men steady as stone. After the victory, Hannibal surveyed the field. Standards of Rome lay broken, the bodies of consuls and senators among the fallen. Here was Rome's elite, destroyed in a single blow. Many of his officers urged him to march at once upon the city itself, to strike the heart while it was weak. But Hannibal did not. His reasons are debated even now. Some say his army, though victorious, was too exhausted, too diminished to assault the fortified city of Rome. Others claim he sought reinforcements from Carthage that never came. Still others believe he hoped Rome's allies would abandon it after such a defeat, crumbling the republic from within. Yet Rome, with its iron will, held fast. No gates opened to him, no surrender was offered. The Senate forbade even the mention of peace. In the end, Cannae was both Hannibal's greatest triumph and his greatest frustration. He had destroyed Rome's legions, humiliated its pride, and shaken its world. But he had not broken its spirit. The Republic endured, and in time its resilience would undo him. Still, the legend of Cannae outlives the outcome of the war. For in that battle Hannibal demonstrated the very essence of command, to see what others cannot, to shape chaos into order, to bend fate itself to his design. As you lie listening, let your mind return to those plains. Hear again the clash of shields, the thunder of hooves, the cries of encircled men, and then, as silence falls, feel the weight of what has been accomplished. A single general with fewer men defeated the might of Rome, not through brute force, but through vision, patience, and brilliance. The echo of Cannae does not fade. It lingers, whispering through centuries, a reminder of what genius can achieve, and of how even the mightiest can be humbled in a single day. Echoes of Zama. The plains of Zama stretch beneath the African sun, quiet now, but once the scene of Hannibal's final stand. If Cannae was his song of triumph, Zama was his song of sorrow. Yet even in defeat, Hannibal's brilliance shone, and the lessons of that day remain as enduring as those of his victories. In 202 BC, Hannibal faced Scipio Africanus, the Roman commander who had studied him, admired him, and prepared to meet him not as a pupil, but as an equal. Their armies stood upon the flatlands of North Africa, watched by God's men and history itself. Hannibal, returning from long years in Italy, commanded a mixed force, mercenaries in the front line, Carthaginian citizens behind, and his veterans of Italy at the rear. At the forefront, his war elephants were to deliver the crushing blow. But Scipio was no ordinary foe. He had learned from Hannibal's very tactics. Where others had feared the elephants, he devised corridors in his lines, channels through which the beasts might pass harmlessly. As the elephants charged, Roman trumpets blared, confusing them. Some scattered, others turned back, trampling Carthaginian ranks. Hannibal's opening strike, the thunder he hoped to unleash, faltered in smoke and chaos. The infantry engagement followed. Mercenaries and Romans clashed steel, ringing against steel dust rising in choking clouds. At first Hannibal's forces held, but as the mercenaries retreated into the second line, confusion spread. Order frayed. Roman discipline pressed relentlessly forward. Then came the veterans Hannibal's most trusted, the men who had marched with him over the Alps, who had stood with him at Cannae. These warriors fought with unmatched courage, steady and fierce their lines holding against the weight of Rome. For a time it seemed as though the field might once again tilt toward Carthage. But the cavalry decided the day. On Hannibal's flanks his riders had been driven off by Scipio's Numidian allies and Roman horsemen. Now they returned, sweeping in behind the Carthaginian line. Dust and thunder announced them, and as at Cannae, the trap closed. But this time it was Hannibal's army that was encircled. The irony was bitter. The master of the double envelopment, undone by his own design, wielded now by his student. The slaughter was terrible. Carthaginian soldiers fell in waves, cut down from front and rear, crushed in the same deadly embrace that Hannibal once orchestrated at Cannae. His veterans fought bravely, refusing to yield, but numbers and fate were against them. When the field grew silent, Carthage was broken. Hannibal survived, but the dream of victory was gone. Historians linger over this battle not only for its tactics but for its symbolism. Cannae and Zama stand as mirrors, one the perfection of Hannibal's genius, the other the reflection of it in a Roman who had learned his lessons too well. Scipio himself acknowledged Hannibal's greatness. After the battle, the two men met face to face the thunderbolt of Carthage and the rising star of Rome. Accounts say they spoke with respect, even admiration. Hannibal, though defeated, bore himself with dignity, conceding to a man he knew was worthy. Zama marked more than a battlefield loss. It ended the Second Punic War. Carthage, stripped of its fleet and forbidden to wage war without Rome's consent, was humbled. For Hannibal, it was the beginning of exile, a life wandering from court to court pursued by Rome's vengeance. The thunderbolt was dimmed but never extinguished. And yet, even in defeat, Hannibal left his mark. Military minds across centuries studied Zama alongside Cannae, seeing in it not only tactics but the reality that no general, however brilliant, can forever outmatch time politics and the unyielding will of an enemy. Zama teaches that genius may win battles, but resilience and resources can win wars. As you lie here listening, let the contrast linger in your mind. Cannae the circle closing around Rome. Zama the circle closing around Carthage. Triumph and tragedy bound together, each defining the other. Hannibal Barca's legacy is not erased by defeat. If anything, Zama adds to his legend, for even the greatest fall, and in their fall their humanity becomes clear. The boy who swore an oath in the temple of Baal-Hamon had risen to terrify Rome, to march across mountains, to outwit armies beyond number. And though he was beaten at last, the echo of his name still resounds, carried on the wind across the plains of Africa. Hannibal the scholar. When people hear the name Hannibal Barca, they imagine battlefields, elephants pushing through snow, Roman legions encircled in terror dust rising on plains stained with blood. Yet behind the general there was also a man of intellect, a thinker whose mind was not only sharp in war, but also trained in learning strategy and culture. Hannibal was more than a thunderbolt, he was also a scholar. From his youth, Hannibal was given a strong education. Carthage, a city born of Phoenician traders, valued not only wealth and warfare, but also knowledge. Its libraries held scrolls from across the Mediterranean texts on mathematics, geography, medicine, and philosophy. Greek influence, too, shaped its culture, for Carthage was not far from the great cities of the Hellenistic world. Hannibal, growing under his father's stern eye, absorbed not just the arts of battle, but also the arts of the mind. He spoke several languages. Greek was the language of diplomacy, and Hannibal used it fluently in dealings with allies and enemies. He understood Latin, the tongue of Rome, and Iberian, the speech of his soldiers in Spain. He could converse with Numidian chiefs, Gaulish warriors, and Carthaginian nobles alike. This gift of tongues made him not just a commander, but a bridge, a leader able to unite men of many nations under a single cause. In strategy, Hannibal thought with precision and imagination. He studied the campaigns of past generals from Alexander the Great to Pyrrhus of Epirus, and drew upon them to form his own art of war. His genius lay not only in knowing tactics, but in reshaping them, adapting them to new circumstances. He perfected the double envelopment used so brilliantly at Cannae, but he also mastered feigned retreats, ambushes, and the skillful use of terrain. He understood psychology, how to bait an enemy into rashness, how to sap morale, how to inspire loyalty. Even his use of war elephants showed imagination. These beasts were more than brute force. Hannibal employed them to terrify, to break cavalry charges, to unsettle the Roman mind. Though their effectiveness was limited at times, the vision behind them revealed a mind that sought every possible advantage, unafraid of the unconventional. Hannibal's education also touched philosophy and statecraft. He was no mere soldier, he understood law governance and the workings of power. In later years, as a magistrate in Carthage after the war, he exposed corruption and reformed the city's finances, reducing oppressive taxes and restoring stability. His enemies may have hated him, but even they admitted his brilliance in administration. Rome itself respected him even as it hunted him. Accounts describe Hannibal as both stern and disciplined. He lived simply, ate sparingly, and endured hardship as his men did. He was said to sleep little, often wrapped in a cloak beneath the open sky. He valued strength of character and despised weakness, yet he also respected learning. In his camp he welcomed debate, listened to counsel, and considered alternatives before acting. Such qualities made his men follow him not only from fear or duty, but from admiration. One Roman historian centuries later remarked that if Hannibal had written a treatise on war, it would have stood beside the works of the greatest strategists. Though no writings of his survive, echoes of his thought live on in those who studied him. Scipio Africanus, his rival, admitted to learning much from Hannibal. Generals across the ages, from Napoleon to modern commanders, returned again and again to his campaigns, seeking wisdom in his maneuvers. Yet Hannibal was not only about conquest. He had a sense of culture and human connection. Anecdotes tell of him engaging Greek philosophers in conversation, discussing not only war, but the deeper questions of life. He understood tragedy as well as triumph, and his later years reveal a man who reflected on the fragility of fortune. For all his genius, he knew how quickly power could slip away, how easily victory could become defeat. This too is part of Hannibal's legacy. He was not a brute, not a mere destroyer, but a man shaped by study, thought, and vision. His battles were born not of chance, but of calculation, his leadership not only of instinct, but of reason. As you listen, imagine him not upon a battlefield, but seated quietly, a scroll unrolled before him, a lamp burning low. His sharp eyes scan the words, his mind absorbing patterns, lessons, truths. Outside, soldiers rest weapons at their side, but within his tent, the general is also the scholar, learning, reflecting, planning. This blending of mind and might is what made Hannibal truly great. He was not only a man of war, but also a man of wisdom, a leader whose intellect matched his courage, whose education enriched his command. And so when we remember him, we must see both sides, Hannibal the conqueror and Hannibal the thinker. Together they shaped a man whose name endures in legend. Exile in the end. The dust of Zama has long since settled. The legions have returned to Rome in triumph, and Carthage, stripped of its fleets, its treasures, and its pride, bows under the heavy hand of its enemy. Yet Hannibal Barca, the man who once shook the foundations of the Republic, still walks the earth. He is not finished, though his path is no longer lit by the bright flames of victory. Instead, it is shadowed by exile, betrayal, and the quiet tragedy of a man who defied the greatest power of his age. For a time after Zama, Hannibal remains in Carthage. Though defeated, he turns his mind to rebuilding. Elected as Safed, the city's highest magistrate, he throws himself into reform. Carthage is crushed by tribute payments demanded by Rome, its nobility weakened by corruption. Hannibal roots out dishonesty, reorganizes finances, and eases the burdens of ordinary citizens. To many, he is not only a warrior, but also a savior, restoring dignity to a broken city. But Rome is uneasy. Even in defeat, Hannibal's name is enough to stir fear. Senators in Rome whisper that as long as he remains in Carthage, peace can never be trusted. Envoys arrive cloaked in diplomacy, but carrying veiled threats. Carthaginian rivals, jealous and wary of Hannibal's influence, conspire against him. At last, Hannibal sees the truth. His beloved city, the home for which he fought all his life, will betray him to appease Rome. And so one night, he slips away. Hannibal Barca, the thunderbolt of Carthage, becomes a wanderer. He seeks refuge first in the court of Antiochus III, the Seleucid king of Syria. Antiochus, eager to challenge Rome, welcomes Hannibal. Yet court intrigue dulls the edge of Hannibal's counsel. Though he offers strategies urging a bold strike into Italy, the king hesitates, bound by caution. In the end, Antiochus suffers defeat at Rome's hands, and Hannibal is forced to move again. From there he drifts to other courts, Crete, Bithynia. Asia Minor, always welcomed for his fame, yet always pursued by Rome's shadow. The Republic does not rest. Its envoys track him across seas, its demands echo in foreign palaces. Hand over Hannibal, the eternal enemy, the man who once humbled us. Few dare to protect him for long. Yet even in exile, Hannibal remains unbroken. In Bithynia, serving King Prusias, he still devises cunning plans. Once facing a Roman fleet, he fills jars with venomous snakes and hurls them aboard enemy ships. Panic spreads, sailors shriek, and Rome's navy flees in chaos. It is a small victory, but it shows the same sharp mind that conceived Cannae. Still the years weigh heavily. Hannibal grows older. His once dark hair greys, his body bears the scars of decades of war. He lives far from Carthage, far from the land where his vow was sworn. Always he is hunted, never free, never at peace. The end comes in 183 BC in the court of Bithynia. Roman envoys have discovered his hiding place, demanding his surrender. Hannibal knows what this means: to be taken to Rome alive, paraded in chains through its streets, mocked in triumph, would be a humiliation worse than death.
And so he chooses his own fate. Legends say he carries poison with him, always a final weapon against capture. Now with enemies at his gate he takes it. Before he drinks, he is said to murmur words that drift through history. Let us relieve the Romans of their long anxiety, since they think it tiresome to wait for an old man's death.
Hannibal dies as he lived, defiant, unyielding master of his own destiny, not in Rome's chains, but on his own terms. The world mourns him, even his enemies. Scipio Africanus, his great rival, is said to have spoken of Hannibal with respect, calling him the greatest commander he had ever known. For though they stood opposed in war, they shared a bond forged by the clash of genius against genius. And so the story of Hannibal Barca ends. The boy who swore an oath in Carthage, the man who led elephants across the Alps, the general who crushed Rome at Cannae, dies far from home, a fugitive, his city weakened, his dreams undone. Yet his legend outlives him. Rome may have triumphed, but the memory of Hannibal, fierce, brilliant, tragic, endures.
As you rest, let the image linger. Hannibal, older, now seated alone in a foreign land, the weight of years upon his shoulders, yet his gaze still sharp, his spirit still unbroken. Outside, the footsteps of soldiers approach, but within he has already chosen his path. With quiet resolve, he takes his final step into history.
And with that, the story of Hannibal Barca, Thunderbolt of Carthage, Scourge of Rome, warrior and wanderer, draws to a close. His life is a tapestry of triumph and tragedy, daring and sorrow, brilliance and loss. But above all, it is a reminder of how one man's will can shake the world, and how, even in defeat, greatness leaves an echo that never fades. The shadow of Rome. Though Hannibal Barca died in exile far from the land of his birth, his presence lingered like a storm cloud over the Roman Republic. His victories, his cunning, and his very name left scars on the Roman mind so deep that generations afterwards still trembled when they heard it. Rome had defeated Hannibal at last, but in truth Rome was never the same again. The Second Punic War had nearly broken the Republic. The disaster at Cannae alone had killed tens of thousands of men, drained resources, and shaken confidence. Roman mothers whispered a phrase to frighten unruly children: "Hannibal ad portas, Hannibal is at the gates." The words were not an empty warning. For years Hannibal had marched across Italy, so close that the Romans feared he might one day stand before their walls. Even long after his death, the saying remained alive, a memory of dread turned into a proverb. Rome learned from the terror Hannibal unleashed. The legions, once rigid and predictable, began to adapt. No longer would they charge recklessly into traps as they had at Trebia and Trasimene. Commanders studied Hannibal's maneuvers, his feints, his ambushes, his encirclements, and shaped their armies to respond with greater flexibility. Rome's later victories, not only over Carthage but across the Mediterranean, bore the imprint of Hannibal's lessons. Scipio Africanus himself, Hannibal's great rival, often acknowledged this debt. His reforms of the Roman army, training cavalry with greater discipline, encouraging initiative among officers, and using terrain more carefully, all carried echoes of what he had seen in his adversary. In a sense, Hannibal had sharpened Rome, forcing it to evolve to become even more formidable. Yet Rome's memory of Hannibal was not only of fear, but also of respect. Many senators and generals, though bitter enemies, admired his endurance, his courage, his ability to hold an army together in hostile territory for more than 15 years. To them, Hannibal was both a nemesis and a teacher. In politics, too, Hannibal's shadow endured. The Senate never forgot how close Rome had come to destruction. Their harsh treatment of Carthage after Zama, their suspicion of any Carthaginian leader with ambition, their eventual decision to destroy Carthage utterly in the Third Punic War, all were fueled by memories of Hannibal. He was gone, but the fear of another Hannibal drove Rome to act with ruthless determination. Even the great Roman writers could not avoid him. Livy, Polybius, Appian, all preserved his story, each in their own way. Livy, writing centuries later, painted Hannibal as both terrifying and admirable, a man of cruel resolve but unmatched skill. Polybius, closer to the events, admired Hannibal's brilliance, though he wrote as a guest of Rome. Appian cast him as the eternal enemy, a figure of both fascination and dread. Through these pens, Hannibal lived on his image, shifting between monster and genius, villain and hero. In daily life, too, Rome remembered him. Coins were struck celebrating victories over Carthage, triumphs paraded through the streets with symbols of Hannibal's defeat. Yet even these celebrations betrayed unease, a need to remind the people that Hannibal was gone, that the terror had passed. It was as though Rome, even in triumph, could not stop glancing over its shoulder, half expecting the Carthaginian general to return. The shadow of Hannibal stretched even beyond his lifetime into the campaigns of later Roman leaders. Julius Caesar studied him. Augustus remembered him. Centuries later, when generals faced overwhelming odds, they invoked his name either as warning or inspiration. Hannibal had become part of Rome's own story, inseparable from its rise. As you rest, imagine the streets of Rome at night, centuries after Hannibal's death. The lamps glow, the Tiber flows quietly under moonlight. A mother hushes her child with the old phrase, "Hannibal is at the gates." Somewhere, an old soldier recalls the day at Cannae, the terror of being surrounded, the memory still vivid in his dreams. Even in victory, Rome never fully escaped him. For Hannibal Barca was more than an enemy. He was a mirror showing Rome its weaknesses, forcing it to grow stronger, leaving an imprint so deep that even his defeat could not erase it. His shadow lay across the Republic, a reminder of how close Rome had come to ruin and how much it owed to the man it called its greatest foe. Hannibal in memory and legend. History remembers Hannibal not only through the battles he fought, but also through the stories told long after his passing. Some of these stories are rooted in fact, others in legend, and many blend the two until they shimmer like a mirage. To the Romans, Hannibal was both a nightmare and a fascination, a figure larger than life, woven into their culture as both cautionary tale and reluctant admiration. The phrase "Hannibal at portas," "Hannibal is at the gates," became eternal. Mothers whispered it to hush their children. Politicians used it to stir fear of enemies abroad. Even when Hannibal was long dead, the saying lingered on Roman tongues, a reminder that danger could always lie just beyond the walls. It was not simply a warning about a man, it was a proverb about vigilance itself. Writers gave him shape in their works. Livy described him with respect but also with unease, painting him as brilliant but relentless a man who embodied cunning and cruelty in equal measure. Polybius, the Greek historian who lived closer to the events, admired Hannibal's genius, openly placing him among the greatest commanders of history. To Appian and later chroniclers, he was the archetype of Rome's ultimate adversary, almost mythic in stature. Legends grew around details of his life. One tale tells that Hannibal carried poison in a ring, always prepared to escape, capture a story that echoes the dramatic end of his life in Bithynia. Another story insists that even as a youth, he showed signs of greatness, testing himself in daring feats, pushing beyond what others thought possible. Some claimed that in the Alps, when his soldiers despaired, he struck open the mountains with fire and vinegar, cracking rock to clear a path, an image, half miracle, half engineering, preserved in rumor. The Romans, though they feared him, could not help but admire his resilience. For 15 years he roamed Italy, never defeated in open battle, always a step ahead. They compared him to their own heroes, and sometimes grudgingly, even to Alexander the Great. Scipio Africanus himself, his conqueror at Zama, is said to have spoken of Hannibal with reverence, acknowledging that no commander had ever tested him more. Later generations outside Rome also claimed his memory. In Spain, the land where his family built power, stories of Hannibal's courage lingered among the hills and rivers. In North Africa, he was remembered not as a defeated exile, but as a son of Carthage who had stood against the greatest empire of the age. Even in the Middle Ages, when knowledge of antiquity dimmed, Hannibal's name endured, whispered in chronicles and passed down in tales. Artists, too, found inspiration in him. Renaissance painters imagined the march of elephants through snowbound peaks, a vision of courage against the impossible. Playwrights drew on his rivalry with Rome to tell stories of fate, ambition, and downfall. To them, Hannibal was not just a general. He was a symbol of daring genius, of relentless struggle, and of the tragic hero undone by forces greater than himself. And in the hearts of those who study war, Hannibal became eternal. Napoleon studied him walking the very passes of the Alps to understand his march. Generals of modern Europe and beyond turned to Cannae as a model for decisive victory. Even when his city lay in ruins, even when his bones had turned to dust, Hannibal still commanded armies not of men, but of ideas. What is it about Hannibal that keeps his memory alive? Perhaps it is the contrast, a man both triumphant and tragic, both brilliant and doomed. Perhaps it is the image of an underdog leading a patchwork army of many peoples against the rising tide of Rome. Or perhaps it is the sheer audacity of his feats, crossing mountains thought uncrossable, defeating legions thought unbeatable. As you lie here, imagine voices whispering his name through centuries, a Roman mother calming her child, a Greek historian writing by lamplight, a general unfolding a map, tracing Hannibal's moves across the Italian plains, a painter sketching elephants climbing into the clouds. The echoes reach across time, carrying his story forward. Hannibal Barca, the thunderbolt of Carthage, became more than a man. He became a legend, a tale to be told, and retold, reshaped and remembered, feared and admired. And in that legend he still walks forever at the gates. Hannibal's family and the Barcid legacy. Hannibal Barca did not rise in isolation. Behind him stood a family whose name carried both pride and defiance, the Barcids, the thunderbolts of Carthage. To understand Hannibal, one must also see the father who shaped him, the brothers who fought alongside him, and the legacy of a household that bound its destiny to war with Rome. It begins with Hannibal Barca, Hannibal's father, a seasoned commander of the First Punic War. Hamilcar fought in Sicily with skill and determination, earning both victories and the deep respect of his men. When Carthage suffered defeat, forced to surrender Sicily and pay crushing tribute, Hamilcar refused to bow. He led campaigns in North Africa, stamping out rebellions, then turned his gaze to Iberia. There he saw new wealth, new armies, and perhaps the chance to one day rebuild Carthage's greatness. It was Hamilcar who took young Hannibal to the temple of Baal Hammon, who made him swear eternal enmity to Rome. The father's bitterness became the son's vow, passed like a torch into the hands of the next generation. Hamilcar's will was iron, his hatred of Rome unyielding. He gave Hannibal not only his name, but his purpose. Hannibal was not alone. His brothers Hasdrubal and Mago shared in the burden. Hasdrubal the Fair, Hamilcar's son-in-law, continued his work in Spain after Hamilcar's death, weaving alliances with diplomacy as much as with arms. Where Hamilcar was fierce and martial, Hasdrubal was graceful, known for charm and political skill. He expanded Carthage's holdings in Iberia, established the city of New Carthage, Carthago Nova, and prepared the ground for Hannibal's later campaigns. His assassination in 221 BC opened the path for Hannibal to command, but his work had already laid the foundation. Mago, Hannibal's youngest brother, became his companion in war, where Hannibal commanded the grand design Mago executed with vigor, leading troops with courage and loyalty. At Cannae, it was Mago who carried news of the victory back to Carthage, unrolling before the Senate handfuls of golden rings taken from slain Roman nobles. The sight shocked the council, proof not only of triumph, but of the scale of Roman blood spilled. Mago later fought in Iberia and Italy, always at Hannibal's side until at last he was wounded and died at sea, never returning to his homeland. Together the Barcid family embodied Carthage's defiance. Hamilcar forged the dream. Hasdrubal built its foundations, Hannibal brought it to glory, and Mago sustained it with loyalty. They were more than individuals. They were a dynasty, a living resistance to Rome's growing power. Their influence reshaped Carthage itself. In Iberia, they created a semi-independent Barcid empire rich with silver mines and loyal tribes. Some historians suggest that this Barcid domain was almost a state within a state loyal to Carthage, yet ruled with its own authority. The Barcids had wealth, armies, and vision. In them, Carthage found its boldest champions, but also its greatest risk. For not all in Carthage supported them. The city was divided between factions, nobles tied to trade and wealth, and those like the Barcids who pursued expansion and war. Hannibal's victories won him acclaim, but also suspicion. His family's dominance in Spain and his near independence in command drew envy. When Rome demanded Hannibal's surrender after Saguntum, many in the Senate hesitated, torn between fear of war and loyalty to the Barcid cause. Even within Carthage, Hannibal fought not only Rome, but also rivals at home. The Barcid legacy did not end with Hannibal's defeat. Though the family line was shattered by war, their memory endured. To the Romans, the Barcids were the personification of Carthaginian defiance, a dynasty of enemies who nearly toppled the Republic. To later generations, they became symbols of courage against impossible odds. Think of the image of a father leading his sons across seas to foreign lands, planting the seeds of vengeance. Brothers fighting shoulder to shoulder on distant battlefields bound by blood and purpose. A family carrying the hopes of their city, even as that city hesitated to support them. The Barcids lived and died for Carthage, but also for their own vision of glory. As you lie here, imagine their voices across time. Hamilcar, stern and unyielding, pressing his son's hand to the altar. Hasdrubal, smooth-tongued, weaving alliances in Spanish courts. Hannibal, fierce-eyed, charting routes across mountains. Mago, loyal and eager, galloping with news of victory. A family bound together by destiny, thunderbolts cast against Rome. Their legacy reminds us that history is not only shaped by nations, but by families, by bonds of blood, by vows whispered in temples, by dreams passed from one generation to the next. The Barcids carried Carthage's last great hope, and though it ended in ruin, their name endures, etched into the story of the ancient world. The Eternal General. The story of Hannibal Barca stretches across centuries, and though his body rests long in the earth, his spirit still marches. He was not the founder of an empire like Alexander, nor the ruler of a vast domain like Caesar. He left no monuments of marble, no sprawling capitals, no dynasty of kings, and yet his name endures as fiercely, as vividly as those who carved empires in stone. For Hannibal lives not in walls or crowns, but in memory, in legend, and in the eternal lessons of his genius. Generals through the ages have looked back to him. Scipio Africanus, who defeated him, admitted he had never faced a more brilliant foe. Julius Caesar studied his campaigns, measuring himself against the thunderbolt of Carthage. Napoleon, centuries later, walked the Alpine passes where Hannibal had led his elephants, studying the terrain, learning from the daring of a man who had attempted the impossible. Even in modern times, officers in military academies across the world still whisper his name, still sketch the curves of his encirclement at Cannae, still wonder at the will that carried him across the mountains. Hannibal's greatness lies in more than tactics. It lies in audacity. Who but Hannibal would look at the jagged wall of the Alps and see not a barrier but a road? Who but Hannibal would dare to march a patchwork army, Iberians, Gauls, Numidians, Africans, and elephants, against the most disciplined legions of the age? His courage was not reckless but visionary, a kind of courage that bends history. Yet there is tragedy too. Hannibal never conquered Rome. His victories, dazzling as they were, could not break the Republic's spirit. He spent years wandering Italy, brilliant in battle, but unable to strike the final blow. His genius was unmatched, but his resources were limited, and Carthage, cautious and divided, failed to match his daring. In the end, the thunderbolt burned brightly, but could not strike forever. And perhaps this is why we remember him. For Hannibal embodies not only triumph, but also struggle, the greatness of vision, and the bitterness of defeat. He is both hero and exile conqueror, and wanderer admired even by those who hated him. His life is a reminder that brilliance can change the course of history, but that even the brightest flame is subject to the winds of fate. Legends often place him beside Alexander and Caesar, men who reshaped the ancient world. Alexander conquered from Greece to India. Caesar transformed Rome into an empire. Hannibal, though defeated, stands among them not for empire built, but for empire threatened. He was the one man who made Rome tremble, who brought the Republic to the edge of ruin. In doing so, he left as deep a mark as any conqueror. Think of the symbols, the elephants crossing snowy ridges, the circle of Cannae, the one-eyed general riding Surus, the oath sworn in firelight by a boy in Carthage. These images endure because they are not just history, they are myth. Hannibal is remembered not only as a man, but as a story, a tale of courage, brilliance, and defiance against impossible odds. As you drift deeper, imagine him standing at the edge of time, gazing across centuries. To one side, Alexander rides eastward, chasing horizons. To the other, Caesar crosses the Rubicon, his destiny bound to empire. And between them stands Hannibal, the thunderbolt eternal, not for victory alone, but for daring, for imagination, for the way he shook the mightiest republic and forced it to see its own mortality. Hannibal Barca, son of Hamilcar, brother of Mago, the scourge of Rome, the eternal general, his story does not end in exile. It continues wherever strategy is studied, wherever courage is admired, wherever men and women whisper of legends who defied the odds. And so as the night deepens, let his tale rest within you, the boy who swore an oath, the man who crossed mountains, the commander who encircled an empire, and the exile who chose his own fate. Hannibal's footsteps may have faded from the earth, but his march goes on echoing forever in the halls of history.